Hello and welcome back to another episode of Strong Collectors Comics. Today we are talking about X-Men 97, the new trailer, and the question on everyone's minds, have the X-Men gone woke? My name's Jordan, and I'm joined by my plucky sidekick co-host Dakota. Dakota, how you feeling about the X-Men 97 trailer coming up?
I think overall, I really want to be excited, and I think I still, for the most part, am. But I think I maybe had built up a little bit too much in my head of what it was going to be, because I was expecting like the same art style, the same voices, all that stuff. The voices are a little different. Maybe they're the same actor, like voice actors, but they've seemed to have lost their mojo a little bit. Which after however many years, that's acceptable. I think I don't know how old these people are now, but I would imagine you're not going to sound like you did 20 years ago. The art style,
I'm like 30, dude. Not to make you feel older.
Dang. But I think with like the art, it looks more anime style to me. So that, I don't know. I think there's like some cool fight sequences that you could do anime style and it'll look good. And then I think, at least from the trailer, what we saw, it looked like they were trying really hard to have some like really punchy one-liners of like, whenever Cyclops says whatever, and then Wolverine's like, "You're really buzzing in my ear, bub." I was like, "What is it?" I hope that's just cut weird, because that didn't seem natural at all. When like Wolverine jumps on, or when Gambit jumps on Wolverine's back and like charges up his claws, I'm like, this seems like we're like promoting a video game with like combo moves and not a cartoon. I don't know. That's kind of where I was feeling.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I think, well, first off, I was surprised it's coming out next month. I thought it was further away than that, to be honest. So that was the first thing I thought was really interesting. Obviously, I think anytime, when they announced, like, we're doing a straight-up follow-up to that, I think because you don't really do that in live action, because it's like everyone's gotten older. You can't just say, we're picking up right where we left off, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's something to that, because naturally, like, your audience does grow, and there's an opportunity. I think what could have been kind of cool, just as a premise, would have been like 30 years from the end of that show. So like, where are they now, type thing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of gives you, so you don't fall right into, because it's going to be directly compared to the old show now, because it's like right where Professor X, whatever, we pick up right there. So that, as a concept, I was like, I'm not sure how to feel about that. And just because there's always that thing of, it's great in my head, but I don't know if I sat down and rewatched. Like, I know Batman the Animated Series holds up. I don't know if X-Men does the same.
I'll say that it does. And that's the thing, is like, I don't know if like kids today would say that it does, but I think any adult that watched it then will still say they love it now. So that's maybe I'm biased there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, there's always that going on. I will say, right off the bat, of course, you gotta love that theme song. Anytime that comes on, I'm like, all right, I'm pumped. So that was cool. I do agree. It's definitely a different animation style. I think it seems a lot kind of more sleek, or to me, it feels a little more generic, like, than the old show. I was reading a little bit about it. I think it was kind of the art style of like, part of what happened was they had to start outsourcing the show, I think, because it was just like really complicated the way they did the art. So I understand that a little bit. I could probably get over that, though. I will say, with the voice acting, like, I know that's the same Wolverine actor, but for me, the old X-Men Wolverine show, like, that's like I kind of hear that voice for Wolverine in my head. I think he was so good.
Yeah.
So it's part of it. It's like, that's cool, he's back, but it's also like, maybe obviously it might sound different, but from what we heard, I was like, and that to me maybe is indicative of the whole thing. Like, it's a cool idea, but when you revisit it, will it be like, this isn't really quite as cool as like, maybe that's how I thought, like, kind of my experience with The Flash, Michael Keaton Batman, right? I love Michael Keaton Batman, but when I finally saw him back, I'm like, this isn't as cool as I thought it would be. So, I think they have the opportunity to do some cool things, though. I think the idea of Magneto, like, inheriting the Institute is pretty interesting. I'm curious to see where that'll go. And then, you got the kind of classic X-Men in the 90s playing basketball. And,
yeah.
I think that's just was a fun, like the team dynamic from that era of comics and the show and stuff. So
yeah.
I think it'll be fun to revisit.
All right, Jordan. That's all good and well. We're here to talk about how woke these X-Men are nowadays, Jordan.
Right. Yes. So I noticed right off the bat. No. Well, there were some. There was a comparison shot someone made of the infamous shot of Rogue laying down in front of Apocalypse with a very round figure on her lower half, and compared to a much more flattened figure in the new show. And there were quite a few comments about how, they've just kind of totally ruined Rogue right off the bat by giving her a flatter butt, I guess.
Another one, I haven't seen as many comments about it, but I think with us collecting Marvel Legends, we see some of the figures there that we didn't see in the preview. You got Madeline Pryor. You can kind of see the picture over here next to me. Lots of underboob, barely a loincloth. We see the new Marvel Legends figure. She's pretty much completely covered, and I think that's going to upset quite a few nerds. On top of that, it's been said that like Morph is going to be non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So I guess to the like female thing first. I've always, we joke about that too, of like kind of the ridiculousness in many ways of like, okay, but like is that what makes the character? Is that, I don't know. So like I think that's kind of lame if you're like, well, Rogue is defined by what her butt looks like, otherwise she's a bad character. They've ruined the character. It's like, yeah, you don't even know. Like there might be a really cool story, and like I understand that being updated and changed. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I think the Morph, because Morph was in the original show, right?
Right.
I think. Right, and
he had more of the human looking.
Yeah, it looks like the newer version of Morph from what we saw. It's kind of that comic booky, like chalk white head type thing, as he's obviously morphing into other people. I think if there was any character that was going to be non-binary on the X-Men, one that can literally shapeshift into anything,
right?
He kind of wants, or go between male and female, makes sense as Morph. I guess that isn't something that I'm like, how dare they? I like, to me, that would be a thing that makes sense. Like if you were to say, I don't know, I know we've talked back and forth sometimes about in the recent years where it's like Cyclops and Wolverine and Jean Grey are in like a polyamorous relationship or something. To me, that's like, I think that was kind of the point of the dynamic, was like their romantic rivals sort of a thing. So I think if you do that just for the sake of like, we just need to have some kind of representation here, can be ham-fisted when you don't really give thoughtful consideration. Like, but I could see you telling a really cool story with Morph as a non-binary character in the X-Men. I think that could be really interesting, and that kind of makes sense to me.
Sure, but Jordan, it doesn't just stop there. We've got Iceman is gay now. We've got Mystique is now Nightcrawler's dad. Mystique and Destiny are together. Where does it stop? Are they gonna get Richter up here and Shatterstar? Where does it stop? Deadpool's had some crazy stuff. Are they just doing this to just put it in our faces? Why does it have to be on the screen in front of me all the time?
Right. Well, I think what was kind of interesting to me was reading that was kind of what Chris Claremont originally wanted to do, I think, in the 80s, was have Mystique with Destiny, but at the time it was like, we can't do that. But again, it's like, if you think about it, she changes to different shapes, so it's like, who's to say that it's like she has a single gender, I guess. And I think kind of with the X-Men, again, if there's any like comic team or arena to do stuff like that with, I think the X-Men kind of makes sense, because they've always kind of been that group of like, we're dealing with how do we fit in to the world or to society or with each other or whatever that might be. And I think that was always kind of the point of the X-Men, right? Was like, just because people are different than you know, they can it's not like you need to be afraid of them and hate them or whatever. So
it's almost as if it was based off of like a civil rights movement where maybe your two main protagonists are Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And I kind of like when people put in the comments of like when somebody's like, oh, I can't believe Disney's making Marvel do this. And it's like, you're very clearly showing that like you haven't read or understood the comic books. And it's like, you're just kind of falling into this trap of like probably your own echo chamber of like, oh, Disney is ruining my Marvel, when like really it's just they finally have more of an acceptable time frame to be telling the stories that they've always told, but it's just been in the time frame that it was. Like X-Men are mutants, they're always hated by society, kind of seen as second-class citizens, and they're always fighting for, you know, equal rights for that. Not doing anything different here, just the characters are developing into like a modern way of telling that story.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely examples of, whether it's comics or movies in general, but I think that thing of like, well, how much thought have you given into this, or you're just kind of trying to be like, oh, see, look, we're inclusive, we have, you know, and like you don't really put thought or attention into it.
Yeah.
So I and then there's always that feeling too, I think, of like, well, if I don't support this platform of representation, then I'm not supporting it. But it's like, you can't say Disney is, I think, like the authority on that kind of stuff. Like, you know, like you need to support it just because of that. So I get when people say, oh, I'm cautious, or, you know, whatever of how that is handled, because I do think that can be, of course, sensitive topics. And I think they even said that in the rating of the X-Men show. It's like not 13, it's 14, because they're like of mature themes or something like that. So
interesting.
Yeah, I definitely think those are stories that I think, when done well, can really say really interesting things and mean a lot to a lot of people. And whether you like it or not, it's like, dude, there's like how many other X-Men comics and movies, and you know, like you could just stick with those if that's what you really like. And even if there's parts you don't like just enjoy the parts you do. So,
yeah, I think overall X-Men is probably one of my favorite, like, Marvel. I mean, it's for sure the idea of the X-Men are my favorite team. And I think recently, like, I've been enjoying more of those, like, multiple titles over and over. Like, right now I'm reading through the X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold, Iceman, that kind of stuff from, I think, 2018-ish, 2017, something like that. And I think those are super cool. And I think it kind of makes for a more, like you said, interesting stories of, like, you don't have to tell the same, like, boy meets girl, they fall in love. Like, those kind of get very repetitive and boring after a while. I don't know that I necessarily need my Wolverine and Cyclops to be both dating Jean Grey at the same time in a throuple, but it at least breaks the mold, and you get to see something else and read a unique story.
Those are some thoughts we have on the X-Men 97 show, kind of some of the more general, I guess, chatter we've been seeing or hearing as far as X-Men in general, what that looks like, how fans are feeling these days. You can let us know if we're way off, I guess, if we get canceled on episode 3 now. Yeah, I think it's always cool to have these kind of conversations about sort of what stories are doing and how that kind of relates to the world around you. So please be liking, sharing, subscribing, staying tuned for more comic and movie talk. And until next time, stay strong.